A Pinedale, Wyoming man was fined $15,000 by a federal court following his guilty plea in connection with unlawful cattle grazing several years ago. Welcome back to another travel news episode. I'm your host, Robert Witham. I'm a former newspaper journalist. These days I report on travel news. I scour the news for stories of interest to travelers and those who love the great outdoors, so you don't have to. Did you know I'm on Patreon? You can join me there for as little as $1 a month for access to behind-the-scenes photos, videos, stories, and more. And I do share a lot of exclusive content there with patrons. I also share things there sometimes earlier than they make it out to YouTube or other platforms. So if you want to know earlier, you want to know more, check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/RobertWitham. All right, well, back with a story from, this is the second story in 2 days, kind of crazy public land stories from Wyoming. But this one's a little bit different than the kind of thing I normally cover. But if you've ever spent any time camping or just exploring Forest Service lands in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and a bunch of other places, I'm sure, but those are ones I see it a lot. During the summer months, you'll often see cattle grazing on public lands in the national forests, and that's done by ranchers in the area who have entered into a permit agreement with the Forest Service so that they can graze their cattle on public lands. And of course they have to pay fees to do that, and the permits do have provisions around where they can graze, how many animals they can have out there, etc., to make sure that everything is balanced. The cows don't eat all the grass, for example, all the forage, so that wildlife can't have food. So it's all balanced out. But it's very common to see it. And the story's about that kind of situation. Okay, Philip Selby, age 67, aka old enough to know better, had been charged with providing false information to a forest officer, allowing unauthorized livestock on national forest land, and violating the terms and conditions of a grazing permit, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, District of Wyoming. This case originally dates back to 2017, but Selby just entered a guilty plea on October 18, 2021. So if you ever had any experience with or followed anything with the legal system, things often move slowly. Selby's guilty plea in this case follows a years-long multi-agency investigation. They started in multi-state, I might add. They started in 2017. The investigation began in California with allegations of fraud, embezzlement, and theft of livestock. Yes, cattle rustling is still a real thing. And in the information I saw from the U.S. Attorney's Office, they did not expand on or clarify these early allegations of fraud, embezzlement, theft of livestock. But as the investigation progressed, evidence was found of grazing violations in the Upper Green River cattle allotment on the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming, which is absolutely lovely country. If you've never been there, you owe it to yourself to go check it out. And you'll probably see cattle while you're there if you're there in the summer. The investigation revealed that livestock had been shipped from California to the Rendezvous Ranch in Pinedale, Wyoming, by a suspect in California. The case was referred to U.S. Forest Service Law Enforcement and Investigations after a, quote, significant number of illegally rebranded cattle, end quote, were discovered in the national forest. Rendezvous Ranch did have a permit to graze cattle on national forest lands, but it was what is known as a term permit that only allowed grazing of cattle that was actually owned by the ranch. At the time of this was all unfolding in 2017, Rendezvous Ranch did not legally own any cattle. Selby, who was managing Rendezvous Ranch at the time, admitted that he had been engaged in a business relationship with an unidentified suspect in California. I'm sure law enforcement knows who the suspect was, but it's unidentified in the court documents that I saw. Records obtained by law enforcement officers during the investigation showed that the suspect in California had made multiple payments to Selby in connection with the cattle. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, numerous head of cattle were shipped to Rendezvous Ranch, illegally rebranded to create an appearance of legitimacy, and then released onto the Bridger-Teton National Forest for grazing. This was done in violation of permit provisions that are intended to protect range resources and utilization of public land range allotments. Selby signed an affidavit disavowing ownership of 370 head of cattle in the fall of 2017 following a seizure of the cattle by the state. Ownership of Rendezvous Ranch changed hands in the months following the seizure of the cattle. Well, don't forget, travelers, send me links or details for stories you think might be of interest to robert.witham@gmail.com. Thank you to those who have already shared news stories and links. Now that you know what's going on out there, please like this video if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And thanks for joining me in this travel news episode.